Tabitha, get up. In the book of the Acts of the Apostles, written by Luke the physician, Luke the apostle, Luke the evangelist, teller of good news, there is a story about a woman named Tabitha. Tabitha is a maker of clothes, a woman who supports herself with the work of her hands. Tabitha is small in my imagination, small and sway-backed like my grandmother, Ruby Goforth, who was also a maker of clothes, a seamstress. I loved to go to the fabric store with my mom and her mom, loved the feel of the fabrics, some silky and others coarse, some soft and others crisp. I loved the bump, bump, bump of the bolt unrolling as the clerk meted it out yard by yard, giving a little extra at the end for good measure. I loved pouring through the patterns, imagining new dresses for myself, new jumpers, new shorts, and everything with pockets. If a pattern didn't have pockets, Grandma would always add them in just for me. But mostly we were shopping for others, as she created clothes for special occasions or altered things that didn't fit or mended what was torn. I spent many afternoons in my grandmother's dining room with fabric laid out on the table, the thin brown paper pattern pieces pinned in place, watching her shiny scissors that could never, ever be used for any other purpose, easily cut out the necessary elements. The back panel here, the front placket there, a sleeve, just the right length for the person who would wear it, for the measurements had all been taken, written down, remembered. I spent many afternoons in my grandmother's sewing room listening to the steady hum of her Singer machine as she expertly pushed the fabric through, not too fast, not too slow, but at just the right speed for the stitches to line up perfectly at the seam. When we arrived at my grandmother's house for a visit, I wanted immediately to see what she was making. Was there something new hanging on the back of the sewing room door? Who was it for? Where would they wear it? When the book of the Acts of the Apostles introduces Tabitha, her sewing days are over. She has fallen ill and has died. Her body has been washed and dressed, and she has been laid out respectfully in the upper room of her house. The mourners have gathered, and there are many who have come. They are wearing her legacy on their bodies, clothing she has fashioned, not just for those who can afford new things, but also for those with no means of payment, widows without the support of husband or son. Someone remembers that Peter, an apostle of Jesus, is in the nearby town of Lydda, where there has been talk of miracles at his hand. Perhaps he would come. His visit would be a fitting thing for as committed a disciple as she. Tabitha's ministry in Joppa is a reminder that earlier in the book of Acts, there was significant discussion about how to care for the widows of Jerusalem. We read in chapter 6 that 7 men were chosen. 7 men were appointed as deacons and charged with making sure that the neediest did not fall through the cracks. We don't know if there were any deacons in Joppa, but what we do know is that without a formal designation, Tabitha was carrying out that ministry in Joppa. She might never even have heard the term deacon or known that there were others, men, who had been appointed as such, but she served as their equal by simply doing what she did best and sharing her gifts with the whole community. It is interesting, I think, that Luke never mentioned those men again. We know what happened to Stephen, but the rest of them faded from the story. Were they good at their job? Did their efforts have the desired effect? Were the most vulnerable lifted out of poverty? Were daily needs met? And perhaps just as importantly, did they carry out their mission faithfully and with love? We don't know about the outcome of that commissioning, only the intent, that their focus and work should be in caring for the needy among them, and that in doing so, they would share the love of Jesus. When Peter arrives in Joppa, where Tabitha is laid out in an upper room, the widows have not left her side. Because of her devotion to them, they are now devoted to her and to fully honoring the person she was. The literal translation of Tabitha's short eulogy in verse 936 is this: "She was full of good deeds and alms, which she continually did." This week I read an obituary on Facebook for the brother of a church member, a young man lost far too soon. It was one of the most loving and honest obituaries I have ever read. It talked about his passion for justice and his love for others, but among the words that were said about him were these: "His genuine kindness and sharp wit will be missed by his loved ones. We'll even miss his well-targeted verbal jabs and his frustratingly frequent bouts of self-involvement." I need to save that for a file somewhere. One of the things I think is brilliant about that obituary is that it tells the truth about the way we are as humans. I'm sure that Tabitha too had her moments that she was not constantly ministering to others. But she is remembered that way because she used what she had to address the things she could do something about. How easy it would have been for Tabitha to look the other way. She had a skill that gave her income. She didn't have to worry about daily needs. We don't know all of her story, where her wealth originated, or how she came to be part of the Christian community. What we know about her is that she had two names, Tabitha and Dorcas. Tabitha, the Aramaic name that established her belonging in the Jewish community; Dorcas, the Greek name that implied, for whatever reason, she had a foot in that world too. In whatever ways she interacted with her Jewish and Greek neighbors, Tabitha created a beloved community, a network of support and caring through her acts of compassion and sharing of her financial and personal resources. When Peter arrives in Joppa, it is this beloved community who greets him, holding out for him to see the beautiful and practical things Tabitha has created with her hands. As much as the words written about her, these are her obituary. I understand that because when my grandmother died, and even before she died, when I was living in that community, people would say to me, "Your grandmother, Miss Ruby, made my wedding dress. Your grandmother, Mrs. Goforth, made clothes for my children. I always had to take my pants to your grandma before I could wear them. I trusted her with my best suits." There were other things too. Your grandmother taught my Sunday school class. Your grandmother never missed bringing your grandfather to church, even when he couldn't stay awake for service anymore. They were Baptists. He didn't like missing service. When Peter asks everyone to clear out of that upper room, when Peter kneels down to pray, he is doing what he saw Jesus do by the bedside of a little girl, the daughter of a Galilean synagogue ruler, Jairus. And when he takes Tabitha's hand in his, he is doing what he saw Jesus do in that other upper room. And when he calls Tabitha to rise, he uses the same words that Jesus used to awaken Jairus' child. "Little girl, get up." Jesus said that, and the girl was restored to life. Tabitha, get up. Peter says that, and Tabitha is restored to life. This story engages those who would open their hearts to it on so many levels. It is a miracle story, one that shows how the power and energy of Jesus remains at work in the disciples who continue the ministry beyond his death and resurrection. Jesus told them many times, "You will do the miracles I do, and even greater things." Jesus never wanted to be a one-man, flash-in-the-pan miracle worker. Jesus wanted to teach all those who followed him, his disciples from that day to this, that tapping into the power of God can make miraculous things happen. In Jerusalem, in Joppa, in every place where God is alive and present, which is every place, in every person, and in everything, all the time. This is also a story about what it means to be a community, and how the gifts we have been given, whatever they are, can be used to build up the community and spread the love of God around. I had to admit a long time ago that I am not a seamstress. I wanted to be a seamstress. I hung around that sewing room, watched my mother and grandmother make beautiful things. When it came time for me to learn that skill, I could never put the fabric through the machine in just the right rhythm. I went too slow. I went too fast. The needle and thread got all bunched up and everything came to a halt. I couldn't make a buttonhole to save my life. I still love fabric and fabric stores, still imagine the delight of the finished project, but I am not a seamstress. That's okay, because there are those among us here in this community who are wonderful seamstresses, and they make beautiful things, not just clothes, but paraments for worship. I called on one of them recently to make some brand new worship pieces to celebrate Pride Month coming in June. In no time at all, she was showing me a drawing and then a photo of the finished project, rainbow paraments to celebrate God's inclusive love for all God's children. This is a great day to talk about Tabitha and how her specific and unique gifts were used to build up her community. It's Mother's Day, a joyous day for some people and a painful day for others. There is, of course, the joy of celebrating your mom or of being celebrated as a mom. There is also some pain in a day set aside for celebrating women in one specific role for one specific thing. It can be painful for people whose mothers are no longer with us, people who are estranged from their mothers or their children, people who had hoped to bear children and did not, people who lost children or who have chosen not to be parents. What I find remarkable about this story is that Tabitha is celebrated and remembered for who she is: a disciple, a seamstress, a loving woman, a leader in her community. There is no mention of any other person in her household, past or present. So many scholars assume she is a single woman who, in a culture where it is highly unusual, fends for herself and is able to do so. What is abundantly clear is that she is needed and loved and is regarded by other community members, both men and women, as not only a leader, but a vital mothering figure in the community of Joppa. You do not have to bear a child to be a life giver. The call of making new life and abundant life possible for all God's children is the call of every Christian, every disciple of Jesus. Besides the fact that it is Mother's Day, and did I already mention that Mother's Day is complicated, it is Shepherding Sunday, which I talk with the children about a little bit. I love that Tabitha's story is part of Shepherding Sunday this year because I've gotten a little more excited about the whole idea of shepherds watching Michael and Barbara Fleming's Facebook feed. They were part of the Trinity community, still are connected with us, even though their membership is now at another church. A few years ago, when Mike retired, they bought a farm out in Boston, Virginia, which is sort of halfway between here and Charlottesville, out from Culpeper. They started their adventure out with a few sheep and 2 sheepdogs who arrived as puppies. This year, their flock produced 16 ewe lambs and 14 ram lambs. I find this journey both fascinating and amazing. If you would have asked either Barbara or Mike 10 years ago if the remembrance of their life would have included the term shepherd, I honestly don't think it would have been in their plans. Mike was a lawyer, traveling between the East and West coasts. Barbara was perfectly happy with life in Arlington. Now they are loving the adventure of sheep farming, learning all they can from experienced farmers. Now I read about Barbara helping with a difficult birth in the barn until 3 in the morning. I read about how she bottle fed the last ram to be born every 2 hours for a day or so until the mother's milk came in. How do you learn to be a shepherd in retirement? How do you change your story so radically at any stage of life? When I said we are called to be life givers, I'm going to add that we are all called to be shepherds, whether or not we ever help a new lamb come into this world. Jesus called us to be shepherds when he sat down on the beach with Peter after the resurrection and commissioned all of us. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep. The thing about being a shepherd or a mother or a seamstress or any other thing that may be part of your life story or the treasure trove of gifts that are part of your makeup as a person is this: whatever it is, God can use it. Whoever you are, God can use you. You might be remembered for always manning the grill at the church picnic, for bringing the best mac and cheese to potlucks, for showing up to build or repair homes, for welcoming newcomers, for being a clear-eyed leader, or singing with a joyful heart, or being really, really good with numbers, or any one of a million things. Like Tabitha, we have each been given our own story, our own gifts. As disciples of Jesus, it is our job to figure out how to best contribute to the life-giving community that is Christ's body in the world. Amen.